My name is Otto Starr, and I was born in Germany, Furrenwald, which means forest, black forest. It's a suburb of, it was a makeshift establishment built by American soldiers with the help of Jewish relief organizations to house refugees, not just Jewish, there were other refugees in Germany too at the time too. And it's a suburb of Bamberg, Germany. And I do remember somewhat that there were a lot of American soldiers there with tanks. I do remember the Black Forest because my father took me there to hunt for snakes and birds. I don't know, he liked that kind of stuff. We were there in Germany until 1951. My father could have left Germany earlier, but he didn't really want to go to Israel, maybe when I was 48 or something. Later on, the American government offered him Arizona, but he had really made up his mind to go to New York City because he had family here. He had a family from a long time ago. They all lived in New York City. So in 1951, we came here with a Army cargo ship, which wasn't the most pleasant ride in the world. They kept us in a basement. There really wasn't a room. But anyway, they let us out to see when we passed England. And they also let us out when we somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean to see different fish jumping up and down. But eventually we made it to New York City, and that was 1951. And in 1956 we became citizens. My family name was Morgenstern, which is Morning Star, but my father anglicized the name, and he called us Starr, S-T-A-R-R. And many of my relatives changed their name also, anglicized to Moore or Morgan. And basically, my parents didn't really talk about the Holocaust when I was young. They really avoided the subject. It was really friends of mine who mentioned it to me, asked me questions, but my parents just, it wasn't a conversation. Nothing happened. I didn't really know anything till maybe I was getting close to my teenage years. My mother and father started talking to me. A little bit of history. My father was born in Satu Mare, Romania, which in English means Saint Mary. 1904. My mother was born in a place called Nipana, which was a really Ukrainian shtetl village, also around the same area, the Carpathian Mountains, and they're ruled by Austria-Hungary. So a lot of people spoke Hungarian and German, and of course Ukrainian. My father was born in Romania, so he spoke Romanian. And they met, somehow they met later on in life. And my father was courting my mother for a while, but then he was drafted in the Romanian army. And I believe he was there for 3 years and became somewhat of a sharpshooter, so that's my picture of my father. And, but anyway, when he left the army, at that time, my mother went to Hague. That was it's not the capital of Holland, but the second largest city. Right now they have I believe the Court of Justice is located in Hague, of the World Criminal Justice. Anyway, my mother went to Hague because her older sister had a clothing factory, and they knew how to sew, and so she went there to work and help out. My father heard about it, and he went there also. Unfortunately, he was picked up by the Dutch authorities as being a legal alien. He was locked up about 6 months. And he mentioned to me that he got beaten with shoes. That was how the convicts taught each other to be tough. Anyway, my aunt, my mother's older sister, my aunt, managed to get him out after 6 months, and he married my mother in 1933. My older sister was born in 1934. My father didn't want to just be a sewer in a factory. He went to France for a year and a half to study to be a pattern maker. It was still the world place for fashion. And he learned pattern making there and designing suits and everything. And my mother went to visit him once or twice there. I remember because they told me they went to Notre Dame to see the cathedral and, various things in France. But my father, after a year and a half, he graduated, he got his diploma, and he went back to Holland. And things in Holland were pretty good for them. They didn't have any problems. But of course, Europe was changing at the time. It was in 1937. It was a man called Hitler who was locked up in jail in the 1920s. He wrote a book, Mein Kampf. which he wrote down his racial hatred theories about people, and but no one really believed that he was going to actually be able to have the power to do it. When he came out of jail, he joined the SA. They were brown shirts. They're run by a guy called Rome, R-O-H-E-M, and they're really fascist. They really want to, Germany has suffered a lot from World War I. They had to pay reparations. They lost a lot of land. It was a Republican government, but it wasn't that strong. And so the SA were like a very militaristic group. Hitler joined them, but Hitler formed his own group called the SS, which I'm sure is pretty famous now. And there was something happened in 1937 where he plotted with other friends of his to kill all the people of the SSA. And he killed the leaders of the SSA, and the SS became the rulers, and they became the Nazi party. And of course, some other things happened. The Reichstag burned down, and he was blamed on a communist, and Hitler became very popular, and he was made prime minister. Some events that affected my parents individually was Kristallnacht. That was in 1938, November. Hitler passed a law saying all Jews had to leave Germany, but they couldn't take anything with them. So there was a doctor, and his son was a student in France, and he shot the German ambassador to France. He shot, and I believe he killed him too. And that gave Hitler an excuse to attack Jewish businesses and Jewish people just about everywhere. It wasn't just in Germany, it was in also Austria and some parts of Czechoslovakia. The Jewish people, whoever had Jewish, who had a business or whatever, was attacked. And of course, it affected my mother because her older brother had a business in Berlin selling soda. And he was dragged, and I'm sure, my aunts told me he was beaten to death. And what happened to his family? They disappeared. 6 children, gone. Well, 1939, my father knew that the Germans were heading toward Holland, and he had to get out. So they made plans to go to Switzerland. They went to Switzerland, but Switzerland, they had a hard time working. My father said the Swiss people were a little bit prejudiced. They didn't want. He said he worked in a watch factory, but I don't know, he must have worked there for a day or two because they really wouldn't give him any opportunity. My mother worked as a domestic for a while, but they really couldn't stay in Switzerland because the Swiss people really wanted to get rid of him. So they had no choice. They had to go back where they came from. And a lot of my family, a lot of their brothers and sisters went to back to Hungary, but they went to shtetls. They went to my grandmother had a farm. They went back to farms and villages. But my father decided to go to Budapest because he felt it would be safest there. Budapest had 200,000 Jews living there. There were 600,000 Jews in Hungary altogether, but there were 200,000 living in Budapest, and he felt safe in Budapest. He liked politics a little bit, and maybe Communist Party he thought would help him. But he went to Budapest, and Budapest and Hungary at the time was actually a kingdom. So was Romania. But Hungary was not ruled by their king. There was a man called Horthy, H-O-R-T-Y, who was the vice admiral of the Hungarian Navy, and he was a real rightist. He was a fascist in his own way, and he signed a treaty with Italy and Germany to form a triaxis. And Hitler paid him back by giving him parts of Romania and parts of Czechoslovakia as a present. But he told Horthy he had to start sending Jews on freight trains, I guess that's what they had, to send them to either Bergen-Belsen or Auschwitz. Something happened after 3 months, and Horthy stopped it. He didn't want to do it anymore. Now, some people say he found out what Auschwitz really was, and some people say the Germans lost in Stalingrad, and the Russians were starting to push in. And he was scared. He was trying to make friends with the Allies before everything turned upside down. But whatever it was, Hitler threw him out. He disposed of him, got rid of him, and he put a group of people called the White Arrow. And they were Hungarian Nazis. They wore a shoulder strap with a white arrow on it. And they're a pretty dangerous bunch of characters, and they listened to whatever the German Nazis told them. They were accused of killing 20,000 people and throwing them in the Danube River. And the Jewish people had stars, so they could easily pick them out. What happened actually, but when Haughty was a leader, when the White Arrows came in, they went to all the buildings where people lived, and they knew the Burgermeister, I believe that's what they called him. He was like the super of the buildings, and they knew who was Jewish or not. And they took a list, and they made these people leave their residence and move to certain communities inside Hungary, which became ghettos. And there was one big ghetto. My parents had to go there, and the ghettos really had only one door to get out, the front gates. You couldn't really go back. There's nothing there. The buildings, all the buildings were inside, and you had to go out through the front gate. And the White Arrow, I remember my parents said they had to move, and it was there. My parents was in the main ghetto, so I think possibly there were other ghettos too, but they were in the main ghetto because it was near the government buildings, I believe. Later on, the White Arrow came, and they were looking for slave labor. The Germans said they needed slave labor. They had to start moving into Hungary, and so they needed airplanes to land. They needed to build factories and everything. By the way, the White Arrow also brought back the Jewish people being herded together and sent to concentration camps. In fact, the story is that they went to the villages where my aunts and uncles were, and they gathered all of them up, and they prepared them to go on a train. And my grandmother had relatives all piled together. And of course, there was a famous story that a grand aunt of mine, of my grandmother's, they forgot about her. She was probably living alone for a long time, an old lady. And she grabbed her tombstone, she ran out, she joined them. So anyway, the people, my aunts told me that they were taken into Auschwitz. And Auschwitz, there was a man sitting at a table in the front, and he pointed to the left or to the right. The right was gas chambers. The left, you got a tattoo on your arm. They ask you a couple of questions, and you say in a concentration camp. If you can survive, you can survive. If you can't, you can't. Anyway, my parents were in Budapest, and my mother was there, my 9-year-old daughter, who had her 9-year-old daughter, and a 2-year-old son. And my father was still there, and that's when the White Cross came into the ghetto, and they said all able-bodied men had to leave, had to join the group because they were preparing them for labor, slave labor. According to the stories, my father told me later on, he hid from them. He didn't want to get caught, obviously. So his best escape was a roof. He was running around the roofs of the buildings. But eventually, after the 4th day, they got wise and they caught him. and he was caught for slave labor, and he was taken outside of Budapest. And my father told me he had to build landing strips for German airplanes. And but as usual as it sounds, my father managed to somehow get away late at night from wherever he was, and he used to grab some food from someplace, I don't know where, and he used to go visit my mother with her children and give her food. Then he had to leave. Now, this continued for a while because until the Germans got their airstrips, then they didn't need these people anymore. But then my mother was still left there with 2 children, no food, I don't know, with water, and people were dying there because there was a typhus, some kind of disease was going through the community because you didn't have any cleanliness. And, if you died, they just left you in the street, and there were 2 or 3 guys with a wheelbarrow, used to pick you up, throw you in there, and just take you to somewhere corner, like a little bit outside, and just dump you there. There are people buried one on top of the other, And actually, the White Arrows, the Hungarian Nazis, if you had a small child, they'll let you out for like an hour. But you had to bring the child with you, like a baby carriage or something, and you're allowed to scrounge for food. And my mother's one of those. She had a 2-year-old child. She was able to get outside and pick up a little bit of food. And someone told her that the Swiss embassy is throwing out visas from the window. You just have to go to the window, knock on the window, tell them your name, and they'll throw out papers. And she got a Swiss visa, by the way. And but anyway, she went back, and then someone left a note underneath her door saying, "I can save your daughter's life." She didn't know who this woman was, but her neighbors said they saw the woman come there and leave a note saying, the note said, "Meet me at a certain place outside the ghetto and I'll take your daughter away and I'll save her life. And my mother thought about it for a while. Then she didn't know who this woman was. And then she eventually did it. She snuck out, and she saw a woman standing like a block or two away. And she told her daughter, she didn't go with her daughter, but she told her daughter, my sister Greta, to go to that woman, and that was it. And they disappeared. Well, my father was, when they didn't need slave laborers anymore, because they had already built the landing strips or whatever, and the Germans are starting to go in there. They had to get rid of all these people they had, so the German plot was to build a death march. They try to kill as many people as they can by marching them mostly to Austria. And my father got caught in the death march. He had to walk from Budapest, Hungary, to outside Vienna, which is about 550 miles. It was a death march, and a lot of American soldiers testified. They took pictures of, like 2,000 people were shot and left in the forest in Austria. I mean, their idea was not to get you there alive. Their idea was that you die on the way there. And of course, my father told me he got hit so many times with a rifle butt, but he didn't faint. He kept on going, and he made it there. He made it to Mauthausen. Mauthausen was originally a prisoner of war camp. It was built originally to house Spanish soldiers that Franco had captured during the Spanish-American War, and he gave it to Pétain, who was the Vichy government of France, as for slave labor. They needed slave labor because most of the Germans were soldiers. They needed people to do mines and build ammunition. They needed a lot of slave labor. And so, but later on, he also put German criminals there. It was originally, I think it was a they wanted to put German criminals there. Someone who was against the SS, there's someone who did some criminal action. He was also sent to Mauthausen. Now later on, as it got bigger and bigger, they started sending Soviet prisoners of war there. So it really was a prisoner of war camp. But then they started sending Jewish people there, and they said it became a concentration camp. One part of it became a concentration camp. The concentration camp, of course, you had no food, no water, disease. On the slave labor, you had a little bit of something there because they wanted you to stay healthy so you could continue working. But Mauthausen also had no built gas chambers or crematoriums like some of the other concentration camps. But eventually the SS built a mobile gas chamber, and if you're weak or you were sick or you couldn't work anymore, they would put you in a gas chamber, mobile gas chamber, but they couldn't kill more than 30 or 40 people a day. And eventually you had 190,000 people living in Mauthausen, and approximately maybe about 30,000 were Jewish people, and they were in a concentration camp. My father, when he got there, of course, they labeled him, with the stamp. And when they labeled you with the stamp, they asked you what kind of skills you have. They made a file for you. The Germans kept very meticulous files of who they had. And my father mentioned to him, he's a tailor. I mean, the question is, how did my father survive 8 years in a concentration camp? Which he did. So he must have done something. And I guess the way I remember my father said, he used to sew some garments for the German soldiers, something like that. And he used to give them like an apple or something, or maybe half an apple. I mean, that's how it was. And he also found that he spoke Spanish because he was Romanian. He spoke Spanish, French, Italian. And they tried to use him to interpret, to speak to the Spanish soldiers there. And he did it for a little while, but he really didn't enjoy talking to them because they didn't want to talk to the Germans. So he was a little bit conflict. Later on, they just threw my father out, and they just left him in a concentration camp. And actually, he told me he fell down the floor. He didn't know if he was alive or dead. He was lying in his own, whatever he was, excrement. And he was just lying there. He didn't know if he was conscious or not. And eventually, someone tapped him on the shoulder. It was an American soldier. And he said, "Are you alive or are you dead?" He said, he's not sure. He doesn't know if he's alive. He said, he thought he was in heaven. He didn't know where he was. But anyway, he was alive, and they took him to hospital, and they started putting him back together. Getting back to the ghetto, my brother was crying all night, and the next day he stopped crying. So my mother didn't know what to do. She put him in his stroller, I believe it was, And she took him to there was a children's hospital like a block away, and they let you out a certain time of day. And she took him there, and there was a doctor or nurse, I don't know, someone told her he was dead, and she was in shock. And she didn't know what to do. So they told her, listen, you got all those dead people in the basement of this building. You got all the dead people, and just throw his body over there. But this lady came over to her and said, for 19 pfennigs, which is Hungarian money, I'll put him in a casket. And my mother didn't know what to do, but then she did it. She gave her 19 pfennigs. You know she was, and she left. And that was it. Later on, my mother went to Hungary in 1983 with some of her grandchildren and my sisters, and she went to a Jewish cemetery in Budapest. And in the Jewish cemetery, there's a special area with about 10 wooden coffins. The coffins had no names, but you can speculate who was in there. Anyway, my mother went back to the ghetto, and my father was healed. I guess it took about a week or so, he told us, till they put him back together, more or less. And then my mother was constantly praying for my father to be alive and for her daughter to be alive. She didn't really have anybody left. And, maybe some of her brothers and sisters who taken to Auschwitz. But she was doing a lot of praying. And then all of a sudden, one day, a lot of bombs started falling. Now, that was good and it was bad. Unfortunately, some of those bombs landed on some of the people living in the ghetto, so that was bad. But the other part was that meant somebody was coming. Somebody was attacking the Germans there. Before I change the story, my mother actually tried to sneak out of the ghetto, and she showed the Germans were there outside the ghetto. No longer the white arrows. It was the German soldiers out there. And she snuck out of the ghetto, and a guy asked her where she was going. It was a German officer. She says it might have been Adolf Eichmann. We don't know. Adolf Eichmann did go to Budapest. And they were actually looking at the ghetto. They didn't know what to do with it. They had issues. They couldn't go in because of disease, and they just didn't know what to do with it. And my mother tried to run out, and the guy said, "Where are you going?" And he showed her a picture, and she showed him her Swiss visa. The guy looked at it, he tore it up, and he told her, "Go back inside, don't come out no more." So, that was, so they really didn't follow any rules, shall we say, And so my mother went back there, and this is, bombs started falling. And then the story was actually that Adolf Eichmann told the German general in Budapest to burn down all the ghettos. And Wallenberg, who was a Swedish ambassador to Hungary, he made a party, like a social party. He invited big wigs, he invited the German generals and everything. And no one knows for sure, but he told the German general, if you burn down the ghettos, you'll be the first person who'll be hung. And the Russians are coming close, and the Americans are coming close, and he must have gotten scared, and he did not burn down the ghettos, which I have to admit probably saved who knows how many people's lives. But anyway, to get back to the story, my mother was praying for my father and everyone. She didn't know anybody was. And then then after the bomb stopped, she went outside, and the Russian flag was out there, and these guys had a desk out there. So whoever came out went to them, they took their name, and there was a new leadership there, And then after about a week later, it was 2 weeks a week after the Russians came in, someone told her there's a man downstairs looking for her. And, my father didn't have a key. You had to have a key to get into the door. And it was my father. He had come back from his concentration camp. And my mother was overjoyed. But they had it, my father asked a lot of questions. Where's my son? Where's my daughter? He asked a lot of questions. Well, my mother had to break the news, and then his son died. And but my mother said he didn't know what happened to the daughter. Some Hungarian woman a Christian woman had taken the daughter away. My father figured out who it was, and they went out of the ghetto, and they went to a communist office. So it was run by the Hungarian communists, and he knew the lady. And the lady said, "Yeah, I have your daughter." And my sister came back to my parents. And then Then my parents had another child. My other sister was born in 1945 in Hungary. And then, the Russians were in control there. My father did not want to stay under Russian control. And he made plans. He called up the Jewish agencies to try to get him out of Hungary. And they did. About a year later, they got him out of Hungary and they sent him to Germany for whatever, for immigration purposes. But he was lucky he got out of Hungary because the Russians weren't that nice either, And the communist government, was a different story. Anyway, that's how we got to Germany. And I was born in 1947 in Germany. And then my father, of course, waited to come to America. And basically, my mother when she was about 8, 9 years old, she was approached by Steven Spielberg Productions to make a 3-hour tape for the Shoah Foundation, which is the Holocaust Foundation. Before she died or something, they wanted her to tell us stories. And of course, I listened to it. It was a 3-hour tape. And of course, she had a lot of things that happened to it that I really, I don't know if it'd take too much time if I really told all separate stories. I mean, my mother has stories where she wandered out one day to look for food, and she met a rich person invited to the house. They went on a boat, but then the White Arrows caught them and they killed everybody. They shot everybody and they threw them in the. Well, actually, there's a monument in the Danube River in Hungary. Someone built these built plastic shoes. He put people's shoes all over the river as a for memorial for all the people who were killed by them and thrown in the river. My sister Greta told me my mother actually took an 8-year-old boy because the parents disappeared into her apartment in the ghetto. And my older sister used to go out and scrounge with him for food. He used to run around, But the White Arrows caught the boy. And my sister was hiding, caught the boy. They didn't say much to him, just shot him point blank and threw him in the river. He was only 8 years old. But anyway, we came here in 1951, and basically a lot of things happened. Kristallnacht, and probably no one thought Hitler was going to go that far, but he did. And can it happen again? I don't know. Humanity is humanity. I don't know it can happen. Thank you very much for listening.
Questions? Here, Don? Okay, am I on? No? Yeah, okay, that's it. So in a moment we'll open up for questions. Also for those on the live stream, if you want to chat in a question, we'll try and have that read. I do want to mention a few things before we get into that. Again, this is very important that we have these stories, and anti-Semitism is on the rise. Denial. These are real stories, real people, real experiences. We do have right now on shalomadventure.com our speaker last year, Marie Silverman. She's just been posted. Her story's been posted, so you can see that there. And throughout this week on shalomadventure.com, there are Holocaust stories and like the video we showed earlier. And so we'll have Otto's story posted there as well. We're going to continue this theme of Holocaust remembrance throughout this week and into next weekend. Now, Otto, you mentioned so that your uncle died during Kristallnacht.
Kristallnacht, yeah. And his
killed.
children disappeared.
He was killed. He didn't die. He was
killed.
He
was beaten to death. My aunt told me that. They know that. He was beaten to death.
And your younger brother basically starved to death.
Yeah, he starved. It may have been disease. We don't know. Typhus was in the ghetto.
Okay, in the ghetto. And then now your grandmother was killed.
Grandmother went to Auschwitz. She went to the right, not to the left. She was an elderly person. They had no use for her at all.
Now the aunt that was with her, and she's the one who when they were loading up the trains,
Right,
they
she,
didn't call her out. They didn't know where
right,
she was.
they
Maybe
didn't
she was
know.
sleeping, whatever. And then when she saw everyone leaving,
Yeah, she grabbed her
she
Mesifta. Mesifta was, you used to,
burial
it's a
cloth.
Jewish custom, it's a burial cloth. And she ran out with a burial cloth and it says, "Take me too, I want to meet the Messiah." That's my aunt told my mother. So I guess the woman was ready to go. You know, she's a religious woman and that's the waiting for the Messiah all the time.
Now, the aunt that was with her also, that obviously she survived because she's the one who told you.
I believe all my aunts who went to Auschwitz, there were 3 of them. They were numbered, of course. They all survived in Auschwitz. They actually survived. And this is before the Hungarian ghetto was set up. So they spent like 2 or 3 years there. So I don't know how they survived. I know one of my aunts, unfortunately, told me she's experimented on. You know, there's a man called Joseph Mengele, and he, you know, he wasn't the nicest guy in the world. And I know she didn't want to talk about it, but my parents knew she had been experimented on, whatever reason. But she survived after the war, you know. She survived, and she got married, you know. Didn't have any children, but she survived the war.
And your father was tattooed also, you said?
My father was tattooed. He was in a concentration part. If you were in a concentration camp, you were tattooed. Not if you were a laborer. Then there's a little difference.
We have a picture of him here and your mother.
Right.
What year was that?
That was 1972. That was at an event. And that's my father when he was getting he had a stroke when he was about 78. And then when he was 82, he passed away. You know, he broke his hip and he went to the hospital. He had a weak heart. He had a pacemaker, and he didn't survive the operation.
And then your mother lived how long?
My mother actually lived to be 101 years old. She was pretty conscious. She broke her hip twice. And the second time she broke it, she was about 98 years old. And my sister said she had to go to nursing home. And she went to nursing home. We went to nursing home, she developed dementia a little bit. And she lived in nursing home, and then unfortunately, one night she just died. She was close to being 102, but she didn't quite make it.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty good. Especially after all that she went through, and your father went through. Really amazing. Okay, so we'll open it up for, and so in the middle of the picture, that's your sister who was hidden.
Right.
Was with that lady that
That's
took her in.
my sister, right? She was hidden in the Buddha. She went through the Holocaust too.
And it's really amazing how they were all separated and then were able to come back together. I mean, that's so unusual. Was that? Well, the older sister passed away, right?
Oh no, my older sister unfortunately died of cancer at 75. She died just before I came to Florida to live. I think 2006, I think, I'm not sure.
And then
My other sister is alive. My sister was born in Hungary in 45. She's still alive. Yeah, she's a little bit older than me. Still yelling at me. Yeah. Still bossing me, trying to boss me around. But, you know, we're friendly.
What's her name?
My younger sister's name is Anna. My older sister's name was Greta. And my name's Otto. My father called all his children after the different countries they were born. Greta's a Dutch name. Anna is a Hungarian name. Otto is a German name. And my brother's name was Peter. I do not know where he got that from, but I think he got it from some Hungarian somewhere.
Okay. All right, so let's come on back over here. Now, so let's open up any questions, and if there's any of the chat questions, you're able to see them back there, and let us know if there's any chatted-in questions. Any question from anyone here? Yes.
With a family history like that, how do you maintain belief, trust in a God? Well, I'll be honest. You know, my father really lost his religion in the concentration camp. That I know. He came back, was angry, and he really didn't want anything to do with religion for quite a while. My mother came from a religious family, Orthodox Jewish family, and she persevered. She sent me to Jewish school for a while. And actually in Germany, they sent me to some kind of a nun school. I don't know what happened, what that was about. I was with nuns for about when I was young. I had trouble eating, and they put me in some kind of institution. But anyway, my father My father, he started accepting God a little bit later when he got older. He went back to God. He actually went back to his temple. He prayed, and he actually went back to religion. And he told me it was very hard to believe in God after what he saw had happened. You know, at one time he had a spouse belief in Christ when he was in France, but but it came back. It all started coming back when he got old. You know, when he got older, he started going to pray, and he started observing Saturdays, and he started came back to his religion. So, you know, accept God or not, he probably, you know, when I spoke to him when he was sick, he seemed to know he was going to end up meeting somebody.
Okay. Any other questions? As you know, under those circumstances, quite understandable, or the faith was shaken by many. But again, we need to realize that this is not the end. This is not what it's all about. Evil is on this earth. We're not in heaven. It has from the beginning, and it's going to continue until the end. But there is a heaven that we can look forward to and trust in. And this is just a reminder, this place is a reminder of what disobedience to God looks like. Rebellion against God looks like. This is it. And so this is what will help us through eternity to never choose this again.
Oh, yes. Oh, I went to New York. Straight to New York, right. We had family here. Some of my family had been here in the 1920s. So my father, he went to look them up. They went to look up some people, cousins that they didn't really know too well. But also a lot of my family from Europe who had been in concentration camps came in 47. My mother's older sister came in 47. My father's brother and his other sister came in 48. He was a taxi driver, you know. They came here. So he really wanted to come to New York City. He didn't want to go to Arizona. He didn't want to go nowhere else.
Yes. Okay. So the question, right? Thank you. The question was, what year did you come, and what part of the United States? Yes, ma'am.
Oh, yeah. 60 years that we lived in Brooklyn until I came.
So the question was, what part of New York? Brooklyn, New York, right?
I did live in Queens for a while. It was a long time ago. And then I lived in Brooklyn, you know, until I came to Florida in 2011, permanently.
When someone moves from Brooklyn to Queens, they're moving to the country. And these are good questions. These are great questions. Do you want to just kind of, I should have stated earlier, make sure the questions are directed to Otto and about Otto's story and about Otto's family, or about the Holocaust in general, and keep it to short questions, not other times we've had it where people then went off on some kind of topic and just basically preached, you know. So, but if you have a question, here and then there.
Yeah.
Okay, so the older sister.
Well, my older sister married a...
Wait 1 second. So the older sister did the older sister come to know the Lord? Did she accept Yeshua? That's the question.
She came to know the Lord, but she didn't. She married an Orthodox Jewish man, which my father who didn't like. He didn't like him, but she married him to an Orthodox Jewish wedding, and he was an Orthodox Jewish man. He didn't have curls or anything like that, but he really was a guy who went to synagogue every Saturday, and he prayed, and he followed all the Jewish laws, and she followed him. It was, I know what you say, I understand your question.
So she didn't let the Holocaust...
she didn't, no, she accepted God, and she married my father didn't want her to marry a religious man. There was a lot of arguments, but she married this Orthodox man. You know, he was a modern man, but he didn't, you know, he was Orthodox. He believed in the Torah, shall we say.
We all know that people deny
Okay, that's a very good question. Let me repeat it. And that was asked last night too. With people denying the Holocaust, revising history, what should we say to them?
Well, you know, an interesting story
The
was.
camera.
Oh, camera. Okay. Interesting story was in Mauthausen, when the Americans came, they freed the camp. The Spanish prisoners of war went crazy. They killed every German there. They burnt down the barracks and they raised the Spanish flag. And Eisenhower was trying to stop them because he wanted to keep the German soldiers, SS, alive as witnesses. You know what I mean? To court to find out who, you know. But it didn't happen that way. It's in the books. They just killed every German they found. They went crazy. They burnt down the barracks. They raised the flag. So he didn't have any witnesses in Mauthausen. Now, of course, the Americans had Nuremberg trials where they caught Goebbels, they caught Himmler, they caught a couple of these characters, and they put them into trial. And Eisenhower had taken plenty of pictures. You know, he took plenty of pictures, and in fact, he made the German population march through the death camps, the ones that were in Germany. So I don't know anybody can deny it. I mean, not only Jews got killed in the concentration camp. Out of 11 million people who died, 6 million were Jews. The rest were other ethnic groups. You know, so you have to understand the Holocaust really wasn't good for anybody. And 25 million people actually died in World War II. So I don't know, people who say these things, I hate to bring it a point, but the same people who say America destroyed the World Trade Center because he wanted to get something else. What we know was these guys from Saudi Arabia, whatever, they filled up jets with airplanes, with extra airplane fuel, and they flew into the World Trade Center to cause that terrible event.
So if someone really wanted to know, there is plenty of evidence. There's Holocaust museums, lots of documentation, lots of video, lots of testimonies, lots of stories, lots of documentation. The Nazis kept meticulous documents of who was there, how many were there, how many were killed, how they were killed. The experiments, they took pictures for their own perverted reasons. And so there is plenty of evidence. So anyone who is just flat out and denial, most of the deniers are not that there was no Holocaust. They deny the numbers, that it wasn't so bad, there were other victims, and the Jews weren't the main thing, and it wasn't anti-Semitic, or all these various different things. So they're not denying that there wasn't a war, or that people didn't die, or that there wasn't camps, but the extent of it they deny. And it's still denial, and they got their evil purposes for doing so. So as far as an answer to someone who's in denial, there are some people who are like concrete. They're all mixed up, and they're permanently set.
Is that a good answer?
And there's nothing you're going to do to convince them otherwise. And so sometimes the best answer is just no answer. Just go on. Don't cast your pearls before swine. Go on to someone else who really does want to know and who is open to learn truth and learn history and learn facts. And don't get into a debate. Don't get into an argument. It's a losing proposition.
I just want to ask something too. There was a guy called Goebbels. He was a propaganda minister of the Nazi Party. And he was showing pictures of the German people that Auschwitz was a nice camp. And everybody was enjoying themselves, going to parties, having a great time. And he really helped Hitler spread his ideas. And that's how it works sometimes, you know. And I'm sure things are infiltrated in our newspapers and making things not exactly the way it should be.
Now, with that type of person who's a denier of the Holocaust, or just flat out anti-Semitic, we certainly can still pray. Because God can break up the concrete, God can do miraculous things, God can change a heart. But a simple argument, or your facts, or their non-facts, is not going to win the day. But you can pray, and God can somehow do something in their life to get them to the point of being more open and receptive to hearing and listening to the facts. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Yes. Yeah, that's St. Petersburg.
Yeah, it's very authoritative, pretty good, yeah. There's the one in New York City that's really the best, but that's not the point. The one in Miami is very good too.
And Yad Vashem in Jerusalem.
But
are there any in the chat? Are you able to see if there's any? No? Okay. Lisa?
Well,
Okay, so the question is how has it affected Otto's faith?
well, you know, my parents gave me a Jewish education when I was young, and but I wasn't that great of a student. So when I graduated, I didn't continue the education. I went to public school, public high school, and I actually started losing some of my. I mean, when I ate my first cheeseburger, I thought I was going to hit by lightning, but you know, I survived. And then I started going out with my friends on Saturday. I did not lose all my religion. You know, the things that were pounded into my head by rabbis, and you know, my mother believing in the Messiah, it never left me. I can't say it was always with me, but it never left me. And as I stand here today, my faith is in God. That's how it is.
And he's been bothering us down in St. Petersburg for the last 7 or so years, right?
Well, not too
Now, his
much.
wife Ellen is very nice. I don't know that we got to put up with.
But she's Catholic faith. She belongs to Catholic faith. That's a different situation.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Otto.
Okay, all
Feel
right.
free to see him and talk with him. Okay.
All right. Should I take this off?
Just let me say a prayer here, too. Yeah, if you'll stay up here, I'll say a blessing upon you. Our Lord and our God, ruler of the universe, we praise your name and we are thankful for Otto. We're thankful for your hand in his life. We're thankful, Lord, for your hand over his family. And we surrender those that were murdered into your hands and we commit them to you. And we're thankful for your love and your grace, and thank you that we remain. Thank you that you remain. You are the same yesterday, today, and forever. Thank you that you have a better plan for us. And so work in our hearts and minds, and forgive us for the evil in our hearts, and transform us so that we don't become the monsters that that history has shown any of us could be. Transform us into your image, live in us and through us. In Yeshua's holy name, amen.